I can't get enough of that. How's everybody doing? That was our Rabbi, Yekusiel Kalmanson, leading us in Slichos prayers now a week and a half ago when we started getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. We're still saying Slichos prayers in the mornings as we're looking ahead to Yom Kippur. Can't believe it's already here around the corner. Nina wrote up a beautiful piece that's in this week's AT email bulletin. Basically this idea that fasting is hard, atoning is hard, and so we think that, Yom Kippur is this sad day, but it's not. It's a challenging day. But it's really an uplifting day and a joyous day because the fix is in, right? Because the judge of the world wants us to succeed in our atonement, wants to forgive us, and wants to, renew us and give us a clean slate, as it were. And all that happens on Yom Kippur, so there's a lot to look forward to. Who's in the house on a Wednesday? Yehuda in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Leona in Illinois, Bella in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey, Paula in the Great Northwest, Shandora in the Bronx, Bill in mid-Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Ryan, who loves that prayer, was getting emotional, beautiful. Joseph in Massachusetts, Karen in Northern California, Jonathan in Southern California, Pam in Oregon, Marjorie in Georgia, Ella saying shalom, Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Our daf today, page 38, here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. We're still working our way through chapter 1, now discussing Mishnah number 10, in which we're analyzing the distinctions between laws, halachas, obligations that apply to a Jew who's living in the land of Israel versus a Jew who's living outside the land of Israel. Most mitzvahs, most commandments apply to Jews everywhere, but there are a few that are specific to the land and further specific when the temple is standing in the land. So we pick this up near the bottom of page 37b. Close to the, certainly more than halfway down, 37b. And the Gemara asks, and now that you said that an obligation of the body, as opposed to an obligation incumbent on the land itself, so now that you said that an obligation of the body applies both in Eretz Yisroel and outside of Eretz Yisroel, the land of Israel, why do I need the term dwelling that the Merciful One writes with regard to Shabbos in Leviticus 23:3, right? Basically, that you shall observe Shabbos in your dwellings. And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to say this, as it might enter your mind to say, since the mitzvah, the commandment of Shabbos, was written in the context of the festivals in this passage, it should require sanctification by the court, like the festivals, which rely on the sanctification of the new moon by the court. Therefore, the verse teaches us that this is not required. Recall that unlike now you can, if you go to Hebcal, very useful website, Hebcal, hebcal.com, which has the Hebrew calendar. It will convert any date in the past, present, or future from the calendar we all use in the culture to the Hebrew calendar, and vice versa. So now, you can predict, right, the 6th of Sivan, right, which is Shavuos, what day of the week is that going to land on, and you can find out what day of the week it's going to land on in the year 2024 or in the year 2054. But in ancient times, the calendar was not sort of worked out in advance in that way. A new month would begin when witnesses would testify before the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. Candle? Thank you. I just made a meme today about how a candle dissipates so much darkness. So thank you for reminding me to light our wisdom candle. But at any rate, so a new month would not begin until witnesses testified that they had seen the new moon before the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, and then the court would say, okay, the new month is beginning. And it's not like there was so much leeway, but basically, a new month could have begun, for example, on a Tuesday or on a Wednesday, right? And, and that's when the new month begins. And so then they would send out couriers to tell the people that the new month had begun. And they even had a system of bonfires on mountaintops to communicate, in an age before telegraphs even. How do you get the news out quickly that the new month had begun? Eventually, Jews were scattered over such a large portion of the world, this was really just not going to work very well. And they intercalated, right? The elders of a generation in a later generation just figured out what the calendar would be, and it was set up going forward. But the point is that by Torah law, a month doesn't begin until that testimony is heard by the Sanhedrin. So you might have thought that the laws of Shabbos, which are related to the laws of festivals, would have something similar, and therefore perhaps the laws of Shabbos would only apply, at least some of those laws would only apply to Jews living in Eretz Yisroel. And, you would be wrong if you thought that, and that's what the Gemara is saying, that you might have thought that, but no, Shabbos applies in equal measure to Jews everywhere. The Gemara further asks, why do I need the term dwelling, which the Merciful One writes with regard to the consumption of forbidden fat and blood? In the verse, Leviticus 3:17, a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwellings, that you shall eat neither forbidden fat nor blood. And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to state this, as it might enter your mind to say, since these prohibitions are written in the context of the offerings, then when there is an offering, and the priest sacrifice fat and blood upon the altar, meaning when the temple is standing, that is when forbidden fat and blood are forbidden for consumption. But when the offering is not being brought because the temple is destroyed, and we're in an era, like we have been for almost 2,000 years, where there is no temple and no offerings are brought, you might have thought that the laws against forbidden fat and offerings would be, in our homes, in our dwellings, would be suspended. Therefore, that verse in the Torah teaches us that this is not so. Additionally, the Gemara asks, why do I need the term dwelling, which the Merciful One writes with regard to matzah and bitter herbs? In the verse, Exodus 12:20, in all your dwellings shall you eat matzah. Again, they're asking, maybe because the word dwellings is there, this is only going to apply to Jews living in Eretz Yisroel and not outside of Eretz Yisroel, lest you think that. The Gemara answers, it was necessary to state this, as it might enter your mind to say that since it is written, they shall eat the paschal offering, the Passover lamb or goat, with matzah and bitter herbs, in Numbers 9:11, meaning when there is a paschal offering, which is only when the temple is standing. Yes, one must eat it with matzah and bitter herbs, but when there is no paschal offering, meaning when the temple is not standing, there is no obligation to eat matzah and bitter herbs. The verse, therefore, teaches us that these mitzvahs, these commandments, apply every Passover, whether or not the temple is standing. And the Gemara asks another question, why do I need the term coming, which the Merciful One writes with regard to tefillin and the firstborn donkey at the start of the Torah passage which discusses these commandments. And it shall be when the Lord will bring you into the land of the Canaanite, when you are coming into the land of the Canaanite. And the Gemara answers, that verse is necessary for that which the Tana, the school of Rabbi Yishmael, taught. Perform this mitzvah of wrapping tefillin, on account of which you shall be rewarded and enter the land of Israel. But the point is that these commandments are not dependent on Jews living in the land of Israel. And the Gemara asks about the term dwelling, written in connection with the prohibition of eating the new crop before the Omer offering is brought. on the second day of Passover. Granted, according to the one who says that the term dwelling indicates wherever you dwell. This explains the fact that it is written with regard to the Jewish people immediately after they entered Eretz Yisroel, led by Joshua, quote, and they ate the produce of the land on the morrow after the Passover. That's Joshua 5:11. And this means that on the day after the Passover, they ate the produce of Eretz Yisroel. But initially, before that date, they did not eat it. So apparently, and now we're on 38a, they sacrificed the Omer, and only afterward did they eat produce from the land. But according to the one who says, right, a different opinion, according to the one who says that the term dwelling indicates that the prohibition of the new crop applies only after inheritance and settlement of Eretz Yisroel, meaning there was like 7 years when Joshua was leading the people in wars against the Canaanites to drive them out of the land. You know, these evil child sacrificing peoples that were displaced at the word of God. And so the land was not, rid of that, and the people just settled down and just living peacefully and going about their business. That took like 7 years. So maybe some commandments didn't kick in until the land was settled and the portions of the land within the land were distributed to all the tribes. So according to that opinion, maybe that's why it says this word dwelling about not eating produce until the Omer offering is brought. And the Gemara answers they did not need to eat the new produce, as they still had manna. Although they did not eat the new crop of Eretz Yisroel, the reason was not that it was prohibited. It was just that they had manna, not for all those 7 years, but until that first Passover. Now, this is as it is written, and the children of Israel ate the manna 40 years until they came to a settled land. They ate the manna until they came to the borders of the land of Canaan. Exodus 16:35. Now, what the Gemara is going to ask is, those sound like two different things. They ate manna for 40 years until they came to a settled land. They ate manna for 40 years until they came to the borders of the land of Canaan. So, which is it? Until they came to the border or until they entered and settled the land? So the Gemara analyzes this verse. One cannot say they ate until they came to a settled land, i.e. that they were still eating manna when they entered Eretz Yisroel, as it is already stated, to the borders of the land of Canaan, which indicates that they stopped eating manna before entering Eretz Yisroel on the plains of Moab. On the other hand, one cannot say that they ate manna only until they reached to the borders of the land of Canaan, as it is already stated, until they came to a settled land. So how can these clauses be reconciled? Moses died on the 7th of Adar, and the manna ceased falling, and they ate the manna that was left in their vessels until the 16th of Nisan, even after they entered Eretz Yisroel. Now, remember that the manna, they said, you can't gather it, for more than what you need for one day, or it will spoil. Except on Fridays, you could gather a double portion for Friday and Saturday, because you can't gather manna when we were in the wilderness on Shabbos. So now we're hearing that, wait a minute, Adar is the month before Nisan. Moses died on the 7th of Adar. And they ate manna until the 16th of Nisan. That's 5-6 weeks. Let's say 5 weeks. What's going on? How much manna did they have? And it is taught in another baraisa with regard to the verse, and the children of Israel ate the manna 40 years. But did they really eat it for 40 years? But didn't they eat it for 40 years less 30 days? The manna began to fall on the 16th of Iyar in the first year in the wilderness, and they stopped eating it on the 16th of Nisan in the 40th year. So rather, this verse comes to tell you that they tasted the taste of manna in the unleavened cakes that they took out from Egypt on the 15th of Nisan in their first year, and this sustained them until the manna started falling. Now, it is taught in another baraisa that Moses died on the 7th of Adar, and he was likewise born on the 7th of Adar. he died on his birthday. So from where is it derived that Moses died on the 7th of Adar? As it is stated, so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there. Deuteronomy 34:5. And it is written, and the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Deuteronomy 34:8. This is right near the very end of the Torah. And it is written, now it came to pass after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, Joshua, this is in Joshua 1:1, and it is written, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now arise, cross this Jordan. Joshua 1:2. Right, Joshua, the book of Joshua picks up right where the Torah leaves off, as Joshua is going to lead the people into the promised land. So the Baraisa continues, and it is written, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, saying, prepare your victuals, for within 3 days you are to cross the Jordan. That's Joshua 1:11. And it is written, and the people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. Joshua 4:19. So if you subtract retroactively from that date, the 10th of Nisan, the last 33 days, i.e. the 30 days of mourning for Moses and the 3 days of preparation before crossing the Jordan, and you learn out from here that Moses died on the 7th of Adar. And the Baraisa continues, and from where is it derived that Moses was born on the 7th of Adar? Well, this is as it is stated, quote, Deuteronomy 31:2, and he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I can no more go out and come in. As there is no need for the verse to state today, Moses could have just said, I'm 120 years old. He said, I'm 120 years old today. So what is the meaning when the verse states today? One can learn from it that Moses was born on that day, i.e. he was exactly 120 years old. And this teaches that the Holy One, blessed be he, sits and completes the years of the righteous from day to day and from month to month, as it is stated, the number of your days I will fulfill. Exodus 23:26. And that is a teaching we've had in a few places in the Talmud, this idea that the righteous fill out their days. Right? If somebody is able to live to the age of 120 and die on his birthday, that would be a person who was perfectly righteous. And I believe the only one who did that in history was Moses. And the other one possibly was Rabbi Akiva. I seem to have a memory that Rabbi Akiva also died on his birthday and lived to 120. But anyone, even if you don't live to 120, if somebody actually dies on their birthday, this is a sign to the people that that person was incredibly righteous, an incredibly righteous person, right? So, it doesn't sound like a great birthday gift to pass away on your birthday. Hopefully it happens after a long and fruitful life, but it is an indication that the person to whom that happened filled their days, right? Not everybody dies, not everybody truly lives. Somebody who ends up dying on their birthday, they had some kind of an exemplary life. It is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says the Jewish people were commanded to perform 3 mitzvahs, 3 commandments, immediately upon entering Eretz Yisroel, right? When Joshua led them in. The new crop, diverse kinds, and orlah, right? The new crop that you don't eat until the Omer offering is brought. Diverse kinds means you don't plant, other kinds of plants in a vineyard. And orlah means you don't eat fruit from fruit trees that are in their first 3 years. And these laws apply both in Eretz Yisroel and outside of Eretz Yisroel. And it is logical. One can derive this through a Kal V'chomer argument that each of these mitzvahs should apply everywhere, not just in the land of Israel. If the prohibition of the new crop, whose prohibition is not a permanent prohibition, as it does not apply to grain that grows after the Omer has been sacrificed on the 16th of Nisan, then you can start eating it, and whose prohibition is not a prohibition against deriving benefit, since usages other than eating are permitted of the new grain. I guess you could feed it to your animals. and there is dissolution for its prohibition, i.e. grain that grew before the 16th of Nisan becomes permitted after the Omer offering has been brought, if this law applies both in Eretz Yisroel and outside of Eretz Yisroel, well, then the same law should certainly apply to diverse kinds, which, has less restrictions available to it. And so, right? Because, if the new crop, which is less restrictive, applies both in Israel and outside of Israel, then orlah and kilayim, which are more restrictive and a kind of prohibition that doesn't go away, can't be canceled, can't be retroactively canceled, etc., all the more so, its stringencies should apply both in the land of Israel and outside the land of Israel. That's the Kal V'chomer inference. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai elaborates, with regard to diverse kinds whose prohibition is a permanent prohibition, as it never expires, and whose prohibition is a prohibition against deriving benefit, since one may not only not eat it, but cannot even benefit in any manner from food that is grown in this way, like grain grown in a vineyard, and there is no dissolution for its prohibition, as that prohibition is permanent, is it not logical that it should also apply both in the land of Israel and outside the land of Israel? And the same is true of orlah. With regard to two of those points, orlah is not a permanent prohibition, as it applies only for the first 3 years that a tree produces fruit, but one may not derive benefit from it, and produce from the first 3 years never becomes permitted. So, if the stringencies of the new crop apply both in Israel and outside of Israel, then certainly the stringencies of orlah and kilayim, which are more stringent than the new crop, should also apply both in Eretz Yisroel and outside of Eretz Yisroel. Now, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, says, now we're on 38b, any mitzvah that the Jewish people were commanded to perform before entering Eretz Yisroel, i.e. it was not linked to entry into the land, it was already applying while they were in the wilderness, these mitzvahs should apply both in Eretz Yisroel and outside of Eretz Yisroel. Right? In other words, the commandments that they were already performing in the wilderness before they entered the land, clearly those should apply both in the land and outside of the land. Conversely, any mitzvah that they were commanded to perform only after they entered Eretz Yisroel, these commandments apply only inside of Eretz Yisroel, with the exception of the abrogation of monetary debts in the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year, and the emancipation of slaves in the Jubilee year, right, every 50th year. Even though the Jews were commanded with regard to these mitzvahs that they were to perform them only after they entered Eretz Yisroel, these mitzvahs apply both in Eretz Yisroel and outside of Eretz Yisroel. And the Gemara questions the need for this ruling. Well, the abrogation of monetary debts is an obligation of the body. Since this mitzvah is not referring to the land, what is the novelty of the ruling that it applies even outside of Eretz Yisroel? And the Gemara answers, it is necessary to mention the cancellation of debts, right? Every 7 years, debts would be canceled, only for that which is taught in a baraisa. As it is taught in a baraisa that Rebbe says, right, Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe says, the verse states in the context of the cancellation of debts, quote, and this is the manner of the abrogation, he shall abrogate. Deuteronomy 15:2, and the verse speaks of two types of abrogation. One is the release of land, and one is the abrogation of monetary debts. Since the two are juxtaposed, one can learn the following. At a time when you release land, meaning when the Jubilee year is practiced, you abrogate monetary debts. At a time when you do not release land, such as the present time when the Jubilee year is no longer practiced, you also do not abrogate monetary debts. And the Gemara asks, but why not say that one can learn the following from this juxtaposition? In a place where you release land, meaning inside of Eretz Yisroel, you abrogate monetary debts. And in a place where you do not release land, meaning outside of Eretz Yisroel, you do not abrogate monetary debts. They're not canceled. So if so, the abrogation of debts would apply only in Eretz Yisroel, despite the fact that this obligation is not related to the land. Therefore, the verse states, quote, because the Lord's abrogation has been proclaimed, end quote, Deuteronomy 15:2, to indicate that this obligation applies in any case, even outside of Eretz Yisroel, and this is the novelty of the statement of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara questions the need for the second ruling of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. The emancipation of slaves is also an obligation of the body, not one that applies to the land. What is novel about this ruling? And the Gemara answers that it might enter your mind to say, since it is written, Leviticus 25:10, and proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Right? It's written on the Liberty Bell. And it's about the Jubilee year, the Yovel, that every 50 years, right, when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, it would be a second year. The 7th year, we don't farm the land. And that you do that, cycles of 7. So in the 49th year, you would not farm the land. And then in the 50th year, you wouldn't farm the land either. And all the slaves go free. Right? All the slaves go free. Obviously, all the debts are canceled, etc. But that's the Jubilee year. So, what are we saying? Throughout the land, and proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. So one could say, throughout the land, yes, this mitzvah applies. But outside of Eretz Yisroel, no, the emancipation of slaves does not take effect. Therefore, the same verse also states the seemingly superfluous phrase, it shall be a jubilee, Leviticus 25:10, to indicate that it applies in any case, in all places. The Gemara asks, if so, what is the meaning when the verse states throughout the land? So the Gemara answers that this phrase teaches when the liberty of slaves applies inside Eretz Yisroel, it also applies outside of Eretz Yisroel. And when the liberty of slaves does not apply in Eretz Yisroel, it does not apply outside of Eretz Yisroel. The mitzvah depends on whether the Jubilee year is in effect, not on the place in question. We learned in a Mishna there, tractate Orlah 3:9, the new crop is forbidden by Torah law everywhere. Orlah is forbidden outside of Eretz Yisroel according to a halacha, as the Gemara will immediately explain, and diverse kinds are forbidden outside the land by rabbinic law. So the Gemara asks, what is this halacha, this law mentioned with regard to Orlah, right? Not eating the fruit of trees until the 4th year of the tree. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says it is the local halacha, i.e., this was the practice of Jews in places where they settled. Ula says that Rabbi Yochanan says it is a halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai. Right? It was part of the oral tradition, the core of which was transmitted to Moses at Mount Sinai. Certain laws were not written down. They were given to Moses orally at Sinai, and they constituted, the sort of first group of laws in the oral law, and then the sages would add to that, interpreting from the written law and answering novel questions as they came up over the generations. Ula said to Rav Yehuda, granted, according to my opinion, as I say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that the Mishnah means that this is a halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai. This is the reason why we distinguish between fruit whose status as orlah is uncertain, which is forbidden outside of Eretz Yisroel according to the halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai, and we distinguish that from produce whose status as diverse kinds is uncertain, which is permitted outside of Eretz Yisroel, as the prohibition of diverse kinds applies outside of Eretz Yisroel only by rabbinic law. You see that? Orlah outside of Eretz Yisroel is a law transmitted to Moses at Sinai, so it has the status of a Torah law. Diverse kinds, not eating wheat that was planted in a vineyard, that applies outside of Eretz Yisroel by rabbinic decree. So the difference between Torah law and rabbinic decree, one of the differences is, in a case of doubt with respect to Torah law, does this fall under a particular law? In a case of doubt, we rule stringently. In a case of doubt whether a rabbinic law applies to a situation, we rule leniently. And this is, as we learned in a Mishnah in Orlah, fruit whose status as Orlah is uncertain is forbidden in Eretz Yisroel and is permitted in Syria with no concern about its uncertain status. Outside of Eretz Yisroel, a Jew may go down into the Gentile's field and purchase fruit, that is orlah, from the Gentile, provided that the Jew does not see the Gentile gather it. If you know it's orlah, you can't eat it. But if it's possible that it's orlah outside of Israel, that's okay, apparently. So nevertheless, we learned in the Mishna with regard to the halachas of diverse kinds, if a vineyard has vegetables planted in it, and there are vegetables being sold outside the vineyard, but there's no proof that these vegetables came from the vineyard, in Eretz Yisroel, they are forbidden. And the reason is that as it is possible that the vegetables came from the vineyard, the halacha is stringent in a case involving a prohibition by Torah law. In Syria, these vegetables are permitted because the prohibition against diverse kinds outside of Eretz Yisroel is by rabbinic decree. So in cases of uncertainty, we're lenient. I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in. Outside of Eretz Yisroel, if the Gentile owner of a field containing diverse kinds, kilayim, goes down into his field and gathers produce, then, provided that the Jew does not gather it by hand, he may purchase the produce from the Gentile. And this indicates that outside of Eretz Yisroel, there is a difference between orlah of uncertain status and diverse kinds of uncertain status. This is understandable if orlah is forbidden by a halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai, while diverse kinds are prohibited by rabbinic law. But according to your opinion, that neither orlah nor diverse kinds is forbidden by Torah law, they're both by rabbinic decree, so let the Mishnah teach in the same manner in both cases, either by stating in both this case and that case that one may go down and purchase the produce, or by stating in both this case and that case that one may go down and gather the produce. And the Gemara answers, didn't Shmuel say to Rav Anan that one should teach it either as stating in both this case and that case that one may go down and purchase the produce, or both this case and that case that one may go down and gather the produce? Isn't that actually the way it was stated? And Mar, the son of Rabbana, taught this Mishnah according to the following lenient version. In both this case and that case, one may go down and gather the produce, provided that he does not gather it with his own hand. Right, so where did the law end up on this? Orlah is a halacha. The extent of the prohibition of orlah is determined by a halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai, according to which fruit that is definitely orlah is forbidden, while uncertain cases are permitted. This is in accordance with the Mishnah mentioned here and the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, as the halacha is ruled in accordance with his opinion in disputes with Shmuel. Diverse kinds by rabbinic law. By rabbinic law, one may not plant diverse kinds in a vineyard outside of Eretz Yisroel. Likewise, it is prohibited to eat the product of this planting. Fruit whose status as orlah is uncertain. Fruit that may have grown during the first 3 years of a tree's fruit production is forbidden in Eretz Yisroel. That may have, or uncertain, is forbidden. If we're uncertain, if we don't know that it might have been grown during a fruit tree's first 3 years, if that happened in Eretz Yisroel, that fruit is prohibited. If that fruit that is uncertain status, did it come from a tree in its first 3 years, grew outside of Israel, it is permitted. And this is also the law concerning diverse kinds that may be grown in a vineyard. An example of uncertain status is if there is a vineyard with orlah fruits and grapes are being sold near it, or if there is a vineyard with vegetables planted in it and vegetables are being sold outside it. And the customer does not know with certainty that it came from that vineyard. Outside of Eretz Yisroel and Syria, it is permitted, even if one knows it came from that vineyard, provided that he does not see someone pick it. And the commentaries add that grapes with uncertain status with regard to orlah are permitted outside of Eretz Yisroel, right? And this is why you can buy fruit in the supermarket, right? And you're not concerned that it might have been picked from a tree in its first 3 years, because we're outside of Israel. I suppose in Israel, maybe, I don't even know about this, but maybe they have, kosher fruit that's guaranteed not to have come from such a tree. Or, I think that's what it must be. Or, we haven't discussed whether these laws apply when the temple is not standing. That's a question perhaps we'll get into tomorrow. Okay. What have I got in terms of comments and questions? Sharon says, but isn't the laws of orlah now only applicable in Israel? Exactly. Only I'm aware of this as a purchaser of my shul's esrogim. Right, exactly. So now we've covered that. Nina's like adding to this, but not. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. So Sharon added, the esrogim from Israel have to be marked that they are not orlah. Exactly, right? Exactly. So if it's from Israel, it has to be guaranteed. So even today, when the temple is not standing, that it didn't come from a tree in its first 3 years. But if it comes from outside of Israel, we're not concerned, and we just read why. Great example. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, well, last question from Jonathan, unrelated to today's daf. I was asked, why do we say Shana Tova Metuka beyond being nice? I was thinking maybe Tova, good, right? We say Shana Tova Metuka, it should be a good year and a sweet year. And Jonathan says, I was thinking maybe Tova relates to mitzvahs and Metuka to enjoying doing them. I like that. But I would say that it should be a good and a sweet year. I think it's not only about us performing mitzvahs. I think what we're asking is that this year should be good, right? That good things happen in it, and that it should be sweet, meaning that it feels good while it's happening, right? Sometimes we go through really terrible challenges, and later we realize that was the best thing that could have happened to us, but it's difficult while it's happening. So, while God is handing out blessings during this period and we're asking for everything, we ask, let good things happen and let it feel good while it's happening. That's my impression of why we say it should be a good and sweet year. If you've learned different, let me know. So that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.